So let's focus now on those couple of days of looting and violent incidents. We focus on KwaZulu-Natal, where these riots, as some have called them, have originated. The provincial government there says preliminary investigations show that the damage in KwaZulu-Natal amounts to more than 3 billion rand. Durban has borne the brunt of the ongoing unrest, with 45,000 businesses out of commission and an estimated 16 billion rand in stolen stock and damage to infrastructure and equipment as well. Sifiso Skenjana is the chief economist at IQ Business. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening, Sifiso.
So we've just given those frightening figures. What does ongoing mass looting and destruction then mean for local economies in the country, but specifically in KwaZulu-Natal? I'd imagine those figures will then continue to skyrocket.
Yeah, so KwaZulu-Natal is the third largest province by economic contribution in South Africa. And depending on which measure, it actually sometimes is the second largest after Gauteng. And the challenge that is certainly going to be felt is one, I think, certainly around the scourge of unemployment that we're certainly continuing to see being endemic in the context of our economy, particularly, I think, when you look at the extended definition of unemployment. I think more importantly, I think we're already finding ourselves in a country that has a lot of fiscal pressure. So we don't have money as a government as it stands. And so when businesses are going to be now unprofitable, in essence, we're certainly going to see then lower tax revenues being collected. What that means is that money available for development projects is also going to be scarce. And therefore, one, you've got infrastructure that's already damaged. Two, you're collecting less money to be able to spend on service delivery. And three, you've got organizations that can't employ at the level at which they would like because they're busy trying to rebuild. And all of these things, I think, on balance, is certainly going to be very problematic for the recovery aspirations that we've got as a country post the coronavirus pandemic.
Before we even talk about recovery, Mr. Skenjana, I'm just thinking of, we've got the largest oil refinery in the country in KwaZulu-Natal, and we are seeing growing fears of a shortage of fuel. So industries who need this to continue production and, of course, distribution could also be further impacted. What does this mean if we're not back on the saddle, so to speak?
So our transport industry contributes about 10% of our GDP, and therefore logistics forms a very core component, I think, of our economy. And so when you're going to have, I think, spikes in fuel prices on the back of supply disruptions, on the back of these refineries, certainly, of course, being blocked, I think that's certainly one of the things. But that filters into the goods that we consume. We've already seen inflation numbers coming up higher than expected, and that's putting pressure already on the South African Reserve Bank around the question of whether do they increase interest rates or not, because their core mandate is price stability. And so one of the things that we're going to see is that that's going to filter through into the price of goods that we're consuming in the economy, as well as then the cost of living in general is certainly going to rise. When you then balance that again with what we expect from a lower earnings point of view, lower wages point of view, that means that households are going to come under increasingly higher amount of pressure as well, just on the back of fuel being a pressure point. We also know that we are an importer of fuel, and so our currency levels is important for the fuel that we bring into the country. And so when our currency weakens, that also increases the cost at which we bring fuel into the country. And so all of this uncertainty and this political turmoil certainly does also put a question mark on investors around the stability of our economy.
We've seen the Durban Chamber of Commerce call for emergency assistance after an estimated 20 billion rand in losses is recorded, they say. Just talk to us about how industries can be supported. We know that what's been impacted on, we've spoken about trucks and transporters, but the fact that they are distribution centres, retail centres, and can government afford this, given the fact that our GDP has also been hardly hit by COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19?
This is certainly not a government problem only. I think it is all our problems. And I think the kind of solidarity that you've seen from Santaco, for example, is the kind of support that we're talking about, that civil society can also bring in and weigh in the social, I guess, credibility that they've got to be able to stymie some of these riots. And so it certainly, I think, is that we as society individually can choose, one, not to participate, but choose to also help in the cleanup. Over and above that, there are businesses, for example, and farmers who have security of crop, and therefore, how do they come together and say, how do we sustainably distribute, across the affected provinces to ensure that food security is not compromised in the conscious economy? And I think from a government point of view, then it's certainly a question of, if government is not fiscally capacitated to be able to give these companies relief, but one of the mechanisms that are usually available is, one, how do we use procurement as an enabler for enterprise growth, as well as how do we use incentives to bring back investment and to bring and galvanize a productive capacity building at an industry level. And so I think everyone's got a role right now to certainly play in ensuring that we create a sustainable economy and an inclusive economy. And that's the question that we're not asking for long enough, is around one of the key issues here is that we've got a portion of the population that is disillusioned from this economy. They're not participating in the economy, and therefore they don't feel invested in the things that they're damaging. And so how do we respond to that collectively? And I think these are some of the core and critical questions that we've got to be able to speak to.
Thank you so much for your time and insights. Sifiso Skenjana, the Chief Economist of IQ Business, and it's been said an estimated 129,000 jobs are in danger of being lost.